Well, I'd like just to kick off by telling you what prompted this series. By the way, I'm told by one authority, I think on the East Coast, that we really ought to rename the title of these seminars, Mayor Baba's Word and Don Stevens' Three Bridges. And so I'm not going to claim that particular title, but I think I'd propose a compromise and simply say Mayor Baba's Word and the Three Bridges. And let ownership be a little bit vague, you see. So somebody's got to get killed. It's not Don Stevens. Actually, I want to tell you just a tiny bit to begin with what prompted this. It was about the early part of last summer when I became aware of the fact that there were quite a group of people assembling in Oklahoma to observe the 50th anniversary of Baba's accident in Oklahoma. I was really tremendously attracted by various of the accounts of this, what was going on. And as it was going on, I was reading some of the things that were coming out of it. All of a sudden, I realized, well, it's exactly 50 years since I met Baba face to face for the first time. And it is also the 50th anniversary of the first project that landed in our laps of editing Mayor Baba's Word. So I felt, well, this is a terribly important event. And to be just simply brief and honest, I'd always promised myself that before I shuffled off of this mortal coil, I would get out my notes and scratch my head and remember some of the events that had happened during that 50 years. Because ever since 1952, in almost all of the spare time that I would have from immediate necessities has been spent on working on various projects concerning Baba's Word, which he outlined himself and said, Don, I want you to do this and do that. So it's been 50 years. It's my 50th anniversary of working on his words. And many of the things that have come up are so terribly important and so terribly unexpectedly exciting that I just wanted to share some of those events as we go along through the history of it. So this is the 50th anniversary. So that was a primary motivation for suggesting a series. I must also simply say that in recent years, I've been so struck by the manner in which many of Baba's words and principles that he's outlined about how creation's put together and where drop souls get in, and maybe every once in a while where God gets in through the door too. I think it's very, very important that we remember this, but as time has begun to go along, I've seen so many reinterpretations of things that, gosh, I just have to tell you, I remember working assiduously with Baba and Arish explaining things to me and saying we mustn't do that, we have to be sure and do that. And so when I hear something that sort of surprises me, and as time goes on, when I get more surprises, then I think, well, maybe we're going to have to alert ourselves that we've got a responsibility. So if you happen to get one of these agenda sheets, you will notice immediately under the title Mayor Baba's Word and so on, and the Three Bridges, there's a little parenthesis, and the fourth R, responsibility. And one of the fellows in the London group, where we had a trial balloon seminar, said, well, Don, you better point out that responsibility is terribly important in all of this. We've got a responsibility. So that is going to get emphasized. So I'm going to start off today by asking my pillar at my right here to read a morning intuition. I'll tell you just a tiny bit about that. And when we get to the last and final paragraph, then certainly I do want to explain something very special about it. So anyway, let's start off with a morning intuition 2 days before the London trial balloon came along. And as I scribbled it down, I said, well, this just belongs to the trial balloon seminar on Baba's Word. And so you hear typical Stephen's 3:30 a.m. in the morning intuition. You know, when I'm just going back to the bathroom, as older men very often have to do about that time of the morning. So are we still together, Glenn?
Yes.
Okay, good, all right. So this is we'll forget the 3:30 time in the thing. This is the morning intuition, but the last part of it is a rather special part. I forgot to give you. Oh, that's yours. You know, it helps to have your props in the right place, doesn't it? Also, some of the screws up there to get out of place at times. You got that one?
Yes.
It's in bold type. You don't need your bifocals for that one, Glenn.
A word before we start. My job is to tell you what Baba told me about his manifesting. The path of love, the balance of head and heart, and Don's almost perfect balance between the two. The gradual narrowing of the path of love, the role of his words, and the reason for all the discourses on meditation. If I cannot tell you what he told me, and what he told me it was my responsibility to tell his lovers, then I will have failed my beloved. The story of the three bridges is my observation of how Baba ordered all this within our reference of time and space. I will describe this scenario now, but first, a simple recap of the larger picture I make out of what Baba has provided for us. Meditation is the frame in the future within which Baba's gift of intuition to us will operate. And truing of this intuition is the contribution of the head and the companions bound by inner links. God speaks is the great treasure by which intuition within the frame of meditation can unearth the riches of the path. Read my words with your hearts.
Listen carefully. This is a special paragraph, and I'll tell you the history of this.
Read my words with your hearts open. Use the techniques of meditation I have given you for the frame of intuition, for the spiritual charge I have attached to my words will flow into your being. After that, be content that I am one within you and will guide you on the course of your life.
Well, I put those in quotes, and I just have to explain to you that after Baba had announced, I was one of maybe 8-10 people present on 2 occasions in Mandalay Hall, when Baba said, you know, my avatar gift to mankind is that of intuition, as Jesus Christ's gift was love, as Muhammad's were the laws of living together in groups. And then he went on to Krishna, and what he said about Krishna went out of my mind immediately. But nevertheless, it was terribly important to me what Baba was saying about intuition. So these intuitive things started cropping up a fairly recent time as I started reflecting on this gift of Baba, and as I saw even the Mandalay beginning to disappear pretty fast. So I felt that this is the time, obviously, when Baba's gift of intuition comes into a very major role. But over the course of the years since Baba dropped the body, there have been now 4 occasions when words would come more or less as if they were arriving intuitively, but in a very special manner, and exactly in the manner in which Baba himself used English in my presence again and again, as we were going over various of the editing problems. So as the first one of these cropped up, I said to myself, that is absolutely identical with the way Bob had talked and expressed himself when I was around on all these practical occasions. And I just had the sense that this is direct from Bob. I'm not a psychic person. I don't look for messages. I don't look for things blazoned on the wall, anything of that sort. I think Bob is so terribly, terribly clear about the avatar and the perfect ones far preferring to leave their devotees under the veil and with little or no psychic experiences. They don't know where they are, but they're working in daily life and presumably under a system of internal guidance. So I respect so much that impressed me so much the first time I read it and also heard it from Baba in person, that I've respected it and I haven't looked for it. So I was surprised, but then I said, well, he did say once in a while, however, the avatar and the perfect ones will use a psychic experience to buoy the strength of the devotee in a special situation that they've got to go through. And then Bobby implied almost immediately, I can't remember the words he used, but then I have to wean the person away from the desire for repetition, repetition, and repetition of it. So this is pretty important and significant. But nevertheless, I knew that there was sort of wiggle room, if we can call it that, for us once in a while, maybe to have a psychic experience when Baba says, Tom's going to go through a tough period. His back may weaken, so I've got to put a little starch into his spinal column. So we get it. And he says, now when this happens, honor it, value it, don't let anybody run it down. This is given to you for a very, very vital purpose. But then don't expect the next one day after tomorrow again. Now those are not Baba's words. These are Don Stevens, but it was so clear what his intent was.
Can you repeat those quotes again?
All right. Can I just finish off that tiny little bit, which is turning into sort of a Sermon on the Mount? You know, I have a tendency, Pearl knows how I do this on occasion, so you just have to put up with me. Anyway, we'll go back to that. But so through the years, in almost 40 years since Baba dropped the body, I have had only 4 occasions when this particular sort of use of English would form in the back of my mind. Almost always in a terribly, terribly either emotionally upset crisis period, usually related to Baba groups, by the way. They do happen. Have you ever heard of that? And I'd get upset, and and then little words back there, and I would feel immediately at peace when they would come through. But this then was the 4th one. And I said, well, obviously, this goes beyond Don's morning intuition, and certainly it is meant for the seminars that we're going to have on Baba's Word. So these are then my interpretation of the 4th time when I heard something in the back of my head. I said, this is Baba. So would you repeat it again, Clem?
Read my words with your hearts open. Use the techniques of meditation I have given you for the frame of intuition, for the spiritual charge I have attached to my words to flow into your being. After that, be content that I am one within you and will guide you on the course of your life.
They're really beautiful and very powerful and very, very guiding words, in my opinion. So, incidentally, I don't have a copyright on these words. And Sonia turned out some copies of the basic agenda we're going to try to go through in the 2 days. So if any of you want a copy of that too, I'm sure she'd be very happy to do so. She's smiling, so that gives the yes stamp of approval. Now, when we had done, let's say, the first one of these in the United, actually it was in Hyderabad. There's been one in India already. We had a glorious time. If any of you have ever met Balaji, who's the head of the Yonder group down there. You know, you've run into the original ball of fire. Even antedates Dinah. I almost got Dina stuck in there, but I've been read over the coals a little bit about that. And so in my mind, I usually try to say dynamite. And then I get the accent right, but I can't put the might part in there. I might get in trouble. Now you've got all the morning confessions in a row there. So at any rate, I've got certainly the assurance that you will have some copies of this. But when we were doing, just after the Hyderabad trial session over there, Morton Weisberger, whom I call the Little Bear, he's only 6'3" and looks like Sarosh doubled over. I mean, double size. He's a tremendous guy. He said, Don, you know, you have the 3 bridges as part of the title, and you know, you only got to them in the last 10 minutes of the second day. He said, that's sort of a little short shrift and waiting a long time. Why don't you give a thumbnail sketch of what the 3 bridges are all about as you start? So when we got to Seattle, we did that, and it worked beautifully. Everybody knew where we were from that point on. So I'll tell you what the 3 bridges are. And this goes back way into just after I met Bob in New York in 1952. And I have to warn you all, I see so many familiar faces here that I've seen many times, and almost every time I've been here, I couldn't resist telling the story of the first time I met Mayor Bob in 1952 in New York, in Ivy Deuce's apartment in August, and one hell of, excuse me, Laurel, he tells me I've got to clean up my language a little bit. One heck of a, is that better? At the time. So there we are. He said it was a very good way to start in. People really know where they are. So we're way back in that first time, and after I get done this, you've got to sit still. Please, would you mind Linda hearing it for the 50th time today? Okay. Here we are back in 1952, and Bob is telling various different things. And after I met him and I'm about ready to leave to go back to San Francisco, he said, incidentally, Don, of course you're in petroleum, and I understand that you move around a great deal, and so you might very well be in different cities where there are devotees of mine who have been around me since 10, 20, 30 years by now. And it might be interesting for you to look them up. So, you know, that was my first order from headquarters almost, and I did follow through, and I've always been happy that I did that. Because first of all, I met some superb, you know, the old timers, you read their names, but they've all disappeared, or a lot of them have. And always somewhere in their family library, I'd run across a sort of a little sheaf of papers. At that time, would you believe it, our total library from Baba consisted in the 5 Deshmukh discourse books and a little blue book called The Theme of Creation, with many of the charts in it which are in God's speech now. So that was our literature. That's what we had to grow up on, cut our teeth on. So I also noticed that, as I say, when I went through these people's houses, they usually had Deshmukh. Some of them had the little blue book, but they usually had 3 or 4 or 5 little tiny, not too terribly well printed and not terribly good quality paper, which they had put down and had printed up 2 or 3 of the greetings that Baba gave when he came to their city and addressed the group and so on. These have all disappeared. So I got to read things that I thought were just beautiful. One of the things that I read in one of these little things, I think back in the very early 1950s, was Baba's statement that so touched me right down to my heart. Yes, I say I am the avatar, but as important, now these are Don's paraphrase words, as important as my job description is, nevertheless, I am only a bridge to the truth, which is God. I thought that was so beautiful. You know, just saying, okay, I'm a pretty important person, but really, I'm not it. And all I can try to do is act as a bridge over to the reality of God himself. it wasn't too much after that that I read in one of the discourses about, also Baba said, yes, I say I am God, but I want you to know that you are God too. The only difference between us is I know consciously I am God, and you do not know this yet. So that was that other second beautiful, beautiful statement from the Avatar. They're the same. I know it, and you don't. So, you know, that just reinforced the first statement. So I'm getting to tell you now that that is where I ran into, in Baba's own words, the concept of bridge, that the Avatar is a bridge. And through the years, I thought about that many times and saw the beauty of it and the manner and how, where, and when Baba functioned as a bridge in our lives. Then, when, you know, the inevitable began to happen and I could see that Baba was having more twinges of pain and he didn't look quite so well the second or the third day that you saw him, and I saw time moving along, and I knew that the inevitable was going to happen in probably not terribly distant time. By that time, I had done so much work on various assignments that Baba had given me that I knew the care and the thoroughness with which the Avatar provided for the time when he would not be here in physical bodily form. I'll tell you one or two of those stories during the course of the 2 days, because they're awfully important. But the conscientiousness of the Avatar for providing for the time when he would not be here in bodily form was very touching. So I just said to myself, well, obviously, if the primary bridge to realizing the reality which is God is going to disappear, he certainly has provided a second bridge. And as a matter of fact, when Baba did drop the body, I think almost all of you have heard my story about all the Iranis who crossed my trail in 24 hours. Maybe you'll have to hear that one again, because I love it so much. The only trouble is I can only get halfway through, and then probably poor old Len over here will have to take over while I do a bit of weeping for us. We'll get through it. But as I went through those 24 hours, Baba showed me indelibly that even stable, scientific trained Stevens was not away from the Avatar one moment, and nothing had changed in the closeness of our personal relation. So I knew that Baba was around, but I also knew that there were a lot of people who had never met him and would have some problems in finding their inner relationship, and that Baba must have provided a second bridge to help those people come to him and also to make that final leap to God himself. So I was looking for the second bridge. And I just have to be honest with you, even though I knew Baba was right, you know, right in the back of my right shoulder, nevertheless, the fact that the next time I went to India, he wouldn't be there, and I just resisted going back to India. I think it was 2, 3, maybe 4 years that I didn't get back to India, and I get sort of a plaintive note from dear Arish saying, Don, have you forgotten your friends? We love you and we miss you. Oh dear Arish, he was such a wonderful person. Anyway, so I said, Stevens, you are a dirty stinker. I use slightly worse words, but I've been trying to clean up my language, as Laurent says he's had to do for his little girl Aspen. So Aspen is having an effect on me too. Anyway, there I was, and I said to myself, well, it's going to be terrible going to India without Baba there, but I just got to go. I got a plane ticket and I went. And, you know, within 24 hours, I've been here and there and seen the mandali there and Baba up at the tomb and so on. And the instant that I saw 2 or 3 of the mandali with some of the devotees and the Westerners and the hippies that were around, I said, why didn't I think of it? Here's the second bridge. That was Baba's second bridge that he had carefully prepared. Now, I don't want to imply to you that Baba wasn't present. I've told you already, certainly he had indelibly shown me what the reality of his relationship and presence to me was. And I know that I'm not the sole person. But nevertheless, there are a lot of people who have a little bit of a problem getting over to the Mandali and an interrelation and to Baba through them and so on. So I saw the Mandali functioning in a fashion which was so beautiful that I knew the second bridge was functioning. And then, of course, many of you sitting right here have had the benefit of that Mandali contact, as well as Baba inside of yourselves over the course of some decades now. You know, they've really lasted well, haven't they? They're not quite perpetual motion, but they're the closest approximation to it in human form I've ever run into. So they live into their 80s, 90s. Kitty, just over 100, wasn't it, I think? So they have done a beautiful job of lasting. And as 3, 4, 5 years ago, I began to be aware of how fast they were disappearing, this great asset of Baba disappearing. I said, well, certainly there has to be a third bridge. And I had no sooner posed the question to myself, what is the third bridge? And I knew, because Baba had indelibly, through the course of all of these editing things, impressed upon me with the fact that the third bridge is Baba's word. And by that I mean, first of all, the word being the whole scope of his philosophy of what creation and God are that he has given us, but also some very, 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 very special words, which he took great pains to outline to me, how he had given them out and how he had tied an atom bomb of spiritual energy to them, which is there for us to absorb. And we'll go into that story in very great detail because the story itself is one of our greatest heritages from Baba. So the third bridge. So I tell you, this is what we're aiming at in these 2 particular days, to trace the history of the 3 bridges and what our part of responsibility is. So, shall we then, is that pretty clear, Glenn? Do you think I've covered that okay? Crystal, okay. See, he's brief and to the point, isn't he? I haven't tried out this pillar before, but he's performing pretty well. Well, let's go back now, because I've got to take you back to 50 years ago, last year, to the 50th anniversary. The 50th anniversary of my seeing Baba face to face. We'll go through that story. Do you want to ask anything, first of all, about the 3 bridges? You say, well, Stevens, you said, but I don't agree with you on this, and I think you're nuts on that. You know, a few nice little tidbit conversations like that first.
I had a question.
Yeah, please do.
I don't know if it applies now. So,
let's do it now.
But what about the internal connections Baba talked about? How couldn't that be a possible 4th bridge?
Oh, well, you know, he's given us all sorts of things. We've got the provisional ego, which is terribly important. Maybe we make that one a 5th bridge. And then we've got the provisional ego of selfless service, and a few things like that, you know. There are a lot of possibilities for further bridges.
But how did the internal connections, how do you see what he said about, you know, now is the time to, I don't know the quote.
You did your homework, didn't you? And I've got a copy of that here. And we're going to read that out tomorrow in great detail and go over that.
So that's
not going to be neglected.
Yeah, that's
It's going to be here.
okay.
Yeah. I don't call it a bridge, actually, but to me, it is one of the most important things Baba ever gave to us. What would you like to say?
I just want to ask you a question in reference to meditation and, excuse me, and intuition. And if you could elaborate on that, how can one get more knowledge of intuition, knowing that it is the intuition and not my thinking something.
All right, I give you the first inkle of what's going to happen to the word meditation. The third fairly lengthy story that I'm going to tell in relation to work Baba asked me to do on the discourses brings up what Baba told me about meditation, where it's going to be used, how it's going to be used, where it isn't going to work and something else is going to work better, and so on. So that will probably come somewhere before lunch today if Glenn keeps me on the good narrow path, you see. Yes, what would you like to have?
Would the Baba's Samadhi be included on the second bridge?
Well, that's a good question. You know, we just have to be honest with each other. I love Baba's Samadhi, but I feel closer to Baba outside of the Samadhi, actually, in daily life. I feel him so constantly and individual. I know many people who say my first great, real internal charge came when I walked into Baba's Samadhi for the first time. Many people that hit him like a ton of bricks. Is that still good slang?
Sure.
Perfect.
A man of
Brevity.
in the story I'm going to tell now, you'll see the perfect prototype of Glenn in 1952. So you recognize yourself when we get to that part.
Would that be part of the first bridge? That's what I'm thinking.
Baba's Samadhi.
Yeah.
Well,
That
it
included-
is certainly for many people, let's say, the remaining vital force from the first bridge period. Yeah. I wouldn't question that at all, Ed. It's a good point. Heaven knows that one of the nicest, beautiful books we have from Dear Balnav too, who left recently, was the one which he wrote about this unique experience of Baba's tomb.
Star of the Samadhi. Star of the Samadhi.
Yeah, it's beautiful, really beautifully done. So, all right, let's go to New York in 1952. We were on the West Coast because I was living in San Francisco at that time. I'd been studying under Murshida Martin, who had placed her order, the Sufi order, and herself under Baba's spiritual guidance 7 years before, in 1945, that long before. And she had given us 2 weeks to make up our minds whether we would follow her under Baba's spiritual guidance. Now, because none of us had ever even heard the name Meher Baba before, there was no literature around available to any of us. So to try to make a vital decision like that in 2 weeks took some pretty tall doing. But because Murshida Martin was, you know, one of those rock-like pillars and such a wonderful human being, we all trusted her totally. And so there, to my knowledge, there was not a single Sufi anywhere around that I knew of who did not say, yes, we follow you, Murshida, under Baba. So here we are, you see, 7 years later, Baba kept saying, now I'm going to come and see all of these loving devotees who've been placed under my spiritual guidance. This postponed it, that postponed it, something else happened. We get up into the late 40s and early 50s, and Baba's gone off into something that he calls the new life, and we kept getting circulars sent out by Adi Sr. about vital things happening. Sometimes my hair would stand on end when I get one of these circulars because, gosh, what they were going through. And I thought, what would happen to me if I got into a position where I had to go through something like that? You know, being around the avatar is not all that sweetness and light and assuredness, and everything works out, you know. There's some real crises that you have to go through. So all of these things had been coming through, and eventually he announced that he would be coming in 1952 in the springtime. He said, now, you on the West Coast, don't bother to come out to the East Coast. I'll come out there after a few weeks, and we'll have fun. He didn't say fun, but it would be fun to be around him. And we were waiting for that occasion. Here, all of a sudden, we got a phone call or a telegram saying Baba's been in a fearful accident in Oklahoma, and he's in a clinic there, and several of the Mandali, the ladies principally, have been injured in this mare. We heard about this great knock on her forehead, which indented the bone so terribly seriously. So we were in a state of shock, you know. I guess that was April, wasn't it?
May.
No, May. Yes, you were there, weren't you? So at any rate, we had this frightful, frightful news that came through. So after we got over that, then finally Baba got a message through to us that after he had gone back to Myrtle Beach and recuperated there, then he would come to New York City for a weekend, and any of us who were able to get out there would be able to meet him in New York City. So Now, I have to tell you about one thing. You may say, well, Stevens, that's personal, and we got too many things to cover. But some of the personal things that came up in my life under Baba's thumb had some of the most important spiritual lessons I ever had. So I'll tell you about them, even though they may seem personal as we go along. When I began, let's say, going into the heart of my lifetime of work in the business world, I immediately made an agreement with myself, a promise to myself, that when I came into an organization, had my first boss and then the second boss and so on, I would immediately ask for a personal conversation with the boss and tell him about my Sufi background, about the fact that that was headed by a very great mystic from the Far East. I didn't use the word avatar because I thought that might be a little bit too much of a strain, because most of them didn't know what an avatar was in those days. Now everybody knows the word avatar, and anybody can be an avatar. It's great, isn't it, Adele? Yeah, he's an avatar. Oh yes, he's an avatar. So there we were, but I didn't bring up the word avatar. I would tell him that I was under the direction of a great spiritual master, and that he was top priority in my life. I just had to admit it. And I said, now, I will do my very, very best to observe all of the rules of the game, when I have vacations and days off and so on. But I said, at any time that something comes up where I feel, or he has given me direct orders that I'm to be in a certain spot, then I would like the privilege to come to you and ask if you can allow me, if necessary, some time off, maybe a week or two even, to do what I regard as being top priority in my life. Well, the first time I ever did that to a fellow called Vaughn Smith, who came from Idaho, the Snake Country River. I always remember the Snake River, and it snakes over into Washington, I found. Excuse me, I'm getting off the track. So anyway, I went to Vaughn Smith and said, I want to tell you about some of my own very personal life, and you would call it maybe my religious life, but I'm not quite fond of the word religious. So I told him a little bit about the Sufis and Meher Baba, and the fact that if Meher Baba said something or another about, Don, I want you to do this, or he was available at such and such a point, and I'd have to be around him maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 days, I would come and ask him for some time off. And I said, I wanted you to know about this because this is top priority in my life. I really wondered at the time I was telling him this, whether, he would say, oh, that's fine, and then quietly find a means of letting me out, into the unemployed ranks. But he didn't. I mean, he smiled and looked very, very sincere and said, well, Don, I have to admit to you, I'm not a religious nature person myself, but I respect this in your life, and I honor you for it. I mean, he told me that this had a value to him, even though he was not a religious individual. That surprised me. And he said, Don, I will welcome it any time, and I can promise you that unless we have an emergency, I will certainly say yes to whatever you're asking for. That was terrific. Yeah. Oh, and when that guy backed me up 2 or 3 times, one of the biggest crises I ever had in my life was when I developed my first experimental product in the laboratory and went out and tested it. And then we tested it in a bigger area commercially, and the thing went wrong, and I was horrified. And I began calculating with the contractor about how much damages we were going to have. And he said, well, about $250,000 it has got to be replaced. Well, maybe $250,000 doesn't seem like much, especially for a big company like Standard Oil of California. But boy, I knew that would be a serious thing. On that occasion, I went to my boss. This is so important what I'm telling you about my first experience in spiritual things, so-called, with a modern financial boss in modern industry. When I went to him and told him that we had a serious problem, and he said, well, how much do you think if the worst comes to the worst, we've got to replace it? And I said, about $250,000. He said, well, that's a pretty big figure. It was about a quarter of the whole laboratory's annual budget. So, and he said, well, what do you think we ought to do about it? And he said, do you think we are wrong? I said, yes, I think we under-tested before we went into a project this large. And so he said, what do you think we ought to do? I said, I think we have to be, I would be honest with the customer. He says, I back you up 100%. Can you imagine? Not a quibble. Not a quibble. Is there a way that we can cover it up or something or another? I found later that he had to go to his boss to get his approval okayed. And his boss backed him up 100%. Don says, let's be honest, I back it up too. That was my constant experience straight through my industrial life. And boy, I've been around some awfully tough, ticklish situations. So here I was with my first experience, and we got the news that Mayor Baba was coming back up to New York, and that on this certain weekend in August, have you ever been in New York City in August?
Yeah.
Well, the temperature is close to 100. The humidity is 105%. And it is Hades. I allowed that one, Glenn. This is part of your job, boy. You got to clean up my language. Okay. Tell Little Bear that I behaved in Los Angeles. So here I was, ready to go to New York, and Baba had said that he would spend Saturday and Sunday in New York in Ivy Deuce's apartment and receive us. So I knew that I was supposed to be there and be ready fairly early on Saturday morning. So I said to Vaughn, I've got news that the big boss is going to be in New York over the weekend, and I would like to take the night flight from San Francisco to New York in order to get there. But I have to be out at the airport in the middle of the afternoon for that, so could I have Friday afternoon off? Now, I think late on Sunday I'll be able to get a plane back, but I may not be able to get into the laboratory again until around noontime. And so maybe if I have a half a day Friday and the leniency, if necessary, a half a day on Monday. So Juan looked at me sort of surprised as if I had one or two holes in my head, you know, to ask him for a half a day and a half a day. So he said, Don, you don't even need to ask me for something like that. You can do that on your own. I said, well, but Vaughn, we were careful to explain to each other these things. I wanted just to be sure that you knew about it, and that if I wasn't there, that it was under your approval that I did it. So he said, go ahead. So I get, you know, this is back in the days of prop planes, and the DC-6, is my friend Douglas around here somewhere. You recognize this name, do you? So here I was on a DC-6 prop plane. We had to come down for refueling in Chicago. Couldn't make it the whole distance. So we came down. I woke up for a few moments, went back to sleep, and got up in New York, of course. It was about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning by that time there. I felt like death warmed over. I couldn't eat anything on the plane. I went to the apartment of an old schoolhood friend of mine from the San Francisco Bay Area, Bob Porter, who was already a distinguished psychoanalyst in the New York area. And he had said that I could come and use his apartment and spend overnight and so on. And he said, do you want some breakfast? And my stomach said, good heavens, no. Almost slipped there. Don't look so seriously out the corner of your eye. He saw me almost slip, you see, and he said, oh. I don't know what you do to me if I do slip. Have you got any rules for what you do then? Do you scream? Oh, you pinch.
Yeah.
A good pinch like that. Oh, real subtle. Okay. All right. Real subtle pinch. So, no. And so finally I get a shower and I take a public transport. I was earning a decent salary at that time. But my Swedish mother was terribly practical, you see. And so I didn't waste money even then on taxis. I took a bus down the far side of the park and then around the southern part and then over to the west because Marcia the Deuce had her apartment just off of Park Southwest. And I go up the elevator and buzz on the doorbell and the door opens and there's Charmy Deuce. She was in her mid to late teens at that point. I knew her quite well. And she said, "Oh, Don, you're here?" I thought, well, what do you ask a question like that for? You knew I was coming, you know I'm gone. But you know, these social niceties we've got to go through in life. So she performed properly for me. And I said, "Yes, I'm here." And I performed nicely back to her. And so she said, "Well, now Bob isn't quite ready for you yet, and so do you want to come upstairs and sit in my bedroom until he's ready?" And so I said, "Well, that'd be kind of you." And so as we're about to go up the stairs, I look over into the living room. Beautiful, great big, you were in their apartment, weren't you, Adele? It was a beautiful living room, two-story living room, sort of vaulted, and very impressive looking. So we bypassed that. I saw about 15, 20 people milling around in there. And I certainly didn't want any social small talk. I didn't know if I was able to do it after my night on the plane. So I was relieved that Charmy had got me out of that booby trap, and up the stairs we go, and she opens her door, and what do I see in her room? Sitting over here next to the window on the street side, on sort of a window seat, are two New York girls in their late teens also, whom I knew, who were Baba devotees already, even though they had not met him. And they were jabbering away, and I looked at them, and they looked at me, and I said, "Oh my gosh." Here we are, and I'm going to get stuck with these two jabberwockies. Dinah, if I pronounce this wrong, why you correct my pronunciation.
No, Jabberwocky is perfectly
Jabberwocky.
right.
Yep, this comes from Francis Brabazon and Craig Sand wrote. So there they were chatting away, and I thought, well, this is going to be a horrible time. Instead of sort of generally 15, 20 people, I've got to sit and exchange with these two teenage girls. So I take a look at them, and I don't know, maybe I had apprehension written all over my face. They took a look at me, and you know what they did? They completely ignored me. They turned right back, looked at each other, and they're all gossiping again. So he tried not to heave too audible a sigh of relief, and I went over and sat on the corner at the end of Charmy's bed. And so sitting there and just, you know, in non-compos mentis state, this is what happened, by the way, and thinking of nothing at all, and all of a sudden I noticed that my throat was sore. And I thought, oh good heavens, I must have got a cold on the airplane, and here I am starting out probably the most important weekend of my life to this point, and I've caught a cold. What a thing to have happen. And as I'm thinking about this, instead of just staying in my throat, I felt my eustachian tubes getting irritated. And I said, well, this is the fastest moving virus I ever. You know, how quickly these things run through your mind in a crisis state. You gotta think fast. So here are my eustachian tubes getting sort of sore and so on and so on. And gee, I may have to go to a hospital instead of meet Mayor Baba. And so you got to listen to some of these punchlines, you know, calm yourselves. Here I am trying to correct myself, and all of a sudden I feel something sort of damp on either side of my nose. It's in my eyes already. And my eyes are watering. I've never had a cold in my eyes where my eyes watered like that and runs down the side of my nose. And I no sooner said that to myself, and I said, but that's not a cold, they're tears. And that shocked me. It absolutely shocked me to my eye teeth. Because I was in my early 30s, I think I was 32, 33 years old at that point, and I hadn't cried since my dog, Denny, my Scotch Collie Denny, died when I was 15 years old, and the algebra teacher had to take me out of the classroom and tell me about the crisis that had happened, and I broke down and wept. So here I was, and I said, I haven't cried since Denny died when I was 15, and I don't even know what I'm crying about. I looked inside, I wasn't sad, I wasn't upset, but there were tears rolling down. So of course the next thought in my mind is, those two girls over there on the window seat, they're going to look at me, and when this story gets around, through Baba's circles, everybody's going to say, well, that crazy Stevens guy, we always thought he was sort of balanced and composed and a good businessman and conservative, and sitting on the end of the bed crying about nothing. You know, this is a scandal. Real scandal. What am I going to do? So, anyway,
Are you ever tell us
sort
who
of
the two
sniffed.
girls were?
Huh?
Are you ever going to tell us who the two girls were?
I don't remember who they were. I don't think I ever saw them again. That's an interesting point, Linda. I'm going to have to think about that one. Charmy isn't around for me to ask anymore who they were. So anyway, I thought, what are they doing? And I look over at them, they're not looking at me. So I sort of brush a little bit, and snuff, snuff, and swallow, swallow, you know, sort of thing. And I just got myself barely under control. The door opens, Charmy comes in and says, Don, Bob is ready to see you. So here we are, and I think, oh, thank goodness I got this under control. Go down the stairs, through to the middle of this great big beautiful room, and over here on the street side set in the middle are a double door, which goes into a little band jewel box of a library. I think, I'm sure you've seen Mercedes' library there. It was a beautiful color combination, an awfully intelligent woman with tremendous taste, and I always felt that was the most beautiful thing I ever saw that she turned out. I loved it. So as the doors opened, Charmy opened, and I saw there a photograph which stays indelible in my mind, and I suppose will for a few reincarnations afterwards. Right there, the back part of a chaise longue was pointed towards me in the door. And obviously, reclining on the chaise longue is sort of upside to the left, and the low side, where you put your feet over and get out, to the right. And obviously, it had to be MeherBaba there. And I could see a plaster cast propped up here. And here was another foot sort of at the side, but ready to go down at any point, and for him to stand with great difficulty, of course. So there was MeherBaba, obviously. Then I saw just in front of him was the local up-to-date air conditioning system, which consisted of one of these old tin wash tubs with a block of ice in it, you know, the sort that grandmother put a scrubbing board in and scrubbed the family wash. Well, in this was a block of ice, and on just the other side of it was this fan. And that was the air conditioning system. The fan blowing across the block of ice towards Baba. And then on the far side, against the windows, were four certainly Indian-looking people, and I said those have to be the Mandali, the men Mandali who were traveling with Baba. I take all of this in, and over here are several people standing, and here's Ivy Deuce, Mershida Deuce. And as I take all of this in quickly, I see, obviously, Baba turning around, looking over his shoulder, and saying that Don has come in. You know what he does? Every time I think about it, I'm shocked and I'm touched. I don't know what to do. But I see Baba immediately put his left arm on the sort of upper part of the back to sort of push himself, and his hand down here where it sort of goes over to the back support for his back, and he begins twisting. And as I see him twist, I immediately know what he is about to do. He is about to get up off of the chaise longue and stand and receive this nincompoop Don Stevens standing. Can you imagine the avatar with a, I gotta use my favorite word, with a busticated leg in a plaster cast? Isn't that incredible that the avatar would do something like this? Adele, it just shocked the living daylights out of me. So I immediately jumped a couple of steps forward and said, no, Baba, no. And so Baba turns around the rest of the way, looks at me, and this was the first time that I ever had this imperious gesture that Baba could do so well. Something like that. I'm going to do what I want to do. With a smile on his face, however, as he had so well done. I saw many times in my life, but he was going to do what he wanted. And as soon as the Mondelez in back of the air conditioning system saw what he was doing, the two end of them jump around, they come to Baba's shoulders, support him, and in 2 seconds he's on his feet with his plaster casket a little bit in front of him, turned around, looking at me. Mercia Deuce rushes over to his side, not to assist him in any way. He smiles at me and Mercia Deuce says, "Baba, this is my boy Don." We were close friends, had been even before either of us became Sufis or knew anything about Baba. And so I'd known her for a long time socially, but it was the first time that she had ever called me her boy. This was a new experience. Barely time to sort of recover from the shock of this emotional outburst from Mercia. And Baba looks at her. I have never seen him look more stern. And he says, gesturing, which is translated, I think by Adi Sr., "Your boy, Don. He's my boy, Don." And we've been together since the dawn of time. I said, "Oh," and I was really touched and warmed. And the next thing was, I was shocked because I thought I'd never heard Mercia Deuce contradicted in that fashion. And she could be a rather imperious lady, I tell you. So I thought, what am I going to get into? Because Baba calls me his boy, Don, which is wonderful, but I've got the aftermath to live with when he leaves. Adele, you had an urgent one. This is a short one, my love.
To the left near Baba
Who?
Gustav.
Oh, Gustachi was there. Absolutely.
Gustav was silent.
You're telling me. And Gustachi took me over at that point. Yeah.
Shedding light.
Yeah. He was such a wonderful person. So at any rate, Baba gets Mercia Deuce straightened out on this point, you see. And Mercia Deuce wasn't even phased. I looked at her, and she, not even a tremor. And she simply smiled, and Baba then, because he's taken the ball at this point, no, he's my Don, and we've been together since the dawn of time, and I realized this is the first Avatar pun